Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Shiraz Mishra, and I lead the international markets business at Polestar Analytics. We are a data, analytics, AI, and enterprise planning organization. And BODHI is a space that we built for conversations with industry experts, and this is the first episode of the BODHI GCC Roundtable series, and we couldn't have asked for a better panel to kick it off. But before that, just a bit about GCCs. I think GCCs have come a long way. What started as something, to achieve cost arbitrage play has, in quite a few cases, evolved into something far more significant. In fact, a few GCCs have become the nerve center of enterprise AI, data, and decision making for global organizations. But that evolution is uneven, and the gap between the most advanced GCCs and the rest is widening. So what we'd like to do in the conversation is probably address that gap, what drives it, and how we can reduce that gap. So we had planned for three different, but we still haven't got Arvind. So I have with me Ganesh and Anirban, who have lived this journey across very different industries, very different contexts, and between them bring decades of experience building GCCs from scratch, scaling enterprise AI, and in some cases navigating the most demanding analytic environments. So probably let's start with a round of introductions. Thank you for joining us, and I'd like you to take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, the organization that you work with, and perhaps a couple of lines on why this topic is so relevant and so much of interest to you. So Anirban, could we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Siraj, and happy to be part of the first event at BODHI. I'm Anirban. I lead data and AI globally at Albertsons companies. And Albertsons is one of the largest food and drug retailers in the North America. I've close to 2 decades experience, started my career with Target, moved to Landmark Group, then Rakuten, and then Albertsons. All of my experience, I would say, has been either directly or indirectly been associated with the GCCs because I've had some time spent at the headquarters as well. And what I think is very interesting, that specifically with regards to my journey with GCCs, it has been interesting because I've seen them evolve from being primarily execution engines to becoming strategic partners that influence business outcomes. Today, specifically in the field that I am in, which is AI and data, the expectation is no longer simply delivering projects efficiently. It's also about shaping decisions, driving innovations, and creating measurable business value. Generally, what excites me most right now is that we are at a point where GCCs are uniquely positioned to combine deep technical expertise, the global talent that we have, and the business context to become true centers of intelligence rather than just centers of execution. So that's about me.
Thanks, Anirban. Ganesh?
Hey, thank you, Shiraz, and then thank you for Polestar for giving this opportunity. And this is the first edition. And again, it's always special when you're part of a first edition. So again, either we set the tone on, again, it's great to be part of this forum. A couple of things about me. I have close to 35 years of industry experience, and then last 29 years I'm with Landis & Gear. I represent Landis & Gear. And then I had a wonderful opportunity of bootstrapping the first global development center. At that time, the word GCC was not there. So it's more of either offshore development centers or global development centers back in 2008. So I came in with a PowerPoint, and then had to start everything from scratch and tell people that hey, we are starting. We don't have a building, we don't have a HR, we don't have anything, but you all have to align with us to get there. So I was on an expat assignment at that point in time for Landis & Gear. Then 6 years later, we had a team of 350 people, went back to States, and then again had a wonderful opportunity of coming back to India in 2022 to expanded role to both manage the GCC as well as the India business here. So that's a good journey for me, especially being part of the entire evolution of GDC from ground zero. Now, what's I would say is challenging. I think Anirban mentioned it, now it's all about owning outcomes. So like everybody else, when we started like an extended workbench, again, more of an execution arm, trying to do bits and pieces of things here and there. But over a period of time, as the knowledge got entrenched into the system, then I think, we were able to I would say probably contribute to a lot more of the overall product evolution. See, Landis & Gyr is a unique company because we work on providing edge to enterprise solutions for utilities, especially very large scale systems. And you need to have a lot of deep rooted domain knowledge. You need to have a lot of deep rooted technical and the product know-how, and also how to marry the domain and product know-how in a way it'll all happen. So that evolution, starting from 2008 to where we are today, I think we can proudly say that we are able to contribute to a whole lot of outcomes. And also we are currently about 55% of global R&D workforce somewhere here, which is good. That tells that the confidence that the global stakeholders are having on this center. They look forward for a lot of the team members here to be part of their delivery engine. So this is all some of the good things that's happened as part of the evolution, in my opinion. And then what would be the I would say probably the icing on the cake is the teams here also not only started building things, but also started creating patents. In the last 2.5 years, we have created close to 22 plus patents here from this center because of this deep product and domain related company. This means a lot to us from a GCC point of view. So again, it's pretty exciting in terms of how we had evolved.
Thanks, Ganesh. And Arvind, thank you for joining us. It's early in the morning, 5:30, so really appreciate you joining at this time. But we were just going through a quick round of introductions. So could you please introduce yourself and a little bit about your journey in the GCC space?
Sure, Shiraz. Hi, Anirban, Ganesh. Good to see you guys again. And thank you to Polestar for hosting the forum. I was on the other link, Shiraz. I'm sorry. I'm a little late. But let me get right to it. I think my perspective more is I've spent a lot of time in the life sciences vertical working on the client side. My journey started at Pfizer. I spent a significant amount of time at Bristol Myers Squibb, J&J, most recently Sanofi and Regeneron on the biotech space. So, my involvement with GCCs, and I'm going to try to keep this brief, has been more as a consumer, but evolving the perception within the client side, which I think has been a monumental effort over the years, because the perception has needed to migrate into a premise of what GCCs stand for, and obviously creating the groundwork for the proof that GCC add towards value migration. So that's kind of been my story. Most recently at Regeneron, the last 3 years, I worked to set up our Bangalore GCC, and now I just left in January of this year to do some strategic advising for a few companies. But the Hyderabad Center for Regeneron has just started up, focusing on the commercial side. So, Shiraz, that's been my experience with GCCs.
Thanks, Arvind. So, and thank you to all of you. I think it's clear, 3 very different parts, very different industries, very different contexts. But somewhere there was the same underlying question running through all of them, like what does it actually take for a GCC to move beyond the whole, cost and labor arbitrage to actually adding value, especially in the day and age today. Probably start with something that alludes to this question in an indirect way. What is the one thing about GCCs that the outside world consistently keeps getting wrong? So, and I'll open up to all of you. I mean, if you want to talk about this, the perception of GCCs which you think is wrong.
Sure.
Anyone, Ganesh, anybody? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. Let me go. And I'll just give my point of view from the experience and the lens that I have seen. I think the biggest misconception about GCC is that people and some of the leaders still view them through the lens of cost arbitrage. That may have been true actually 20 years ago, but it's increasingly disconnected from reality right now. So if you walk into many mature GCCs today, or even the new age GCCs which are getting formed right now, you will find teams owning AI platforms, maybe digital products, data ecosystems, cybersecurity programs, and even business critical decision making processes. The conversation definitely has shifted from how cheaply can this be done to how much value can this team create. But outside of this, I think there's another even deeper misunderstanding. People assume GCCs are primarily an operating model or a location strategy. The best and the new age GCCs are neither. They're neither. They are actually a mix of talent strategies as well. So I think people think GCCs are a cost strategy that delivers talent. Actually, the new age and the best GCCs are actually talent and leadership strategies that happen to deliver cost efficiently along the way. So that's what I think, and I'll let both other panelists also chime in here.
Yeah, I think probably from my point of view, I think one of the bigger misunderstanding I would say is again, for those even those who have been in the GCC journey, or those who are starting the new GCC journey, is we are not yet another outsourced firm. Again, a lot of times the global stakeholders tend to think that okay, it's yet another outsourcing company that brings that capacity to the table, or cost and arbitrage to the table. However, a GCC is an integral part of the parent organization. Again, they are a same entity in another country or region, and then they need to be given the same amount of attention, and then groom as if you groom the local teams there in the whichever the geography the parent company is located in there. It takes a while for some of them to really understand, because that needs a significant amount of investment in terms of time, energy, and in terms of grooming, in terms of visioning, missioning, and joint ownership in terms of outcomes. It's not just we have given it to some third party and they are going to execute and bring the results back to us. So that perception is should change. It is changing again as people evolve. The companies tend to understand that how do we do it, and also it is not one size fits all. Some of them are a lot more mature in that understanding, and some of them put a lot of time and effort in terms of investing it. It's not easy, especially considering the geography and time zone separation. I have seen similar to how Arvind had started his day at 5:30 in the morning. I have seen some of our stakeholders in the US start very early, 5:30 to engage with the teams here, make sure that they give all the attention, knowledge transfer, making sure that they are able to deliver that right outcome, which is not going to be easy. I think it's hard work on both sides, both on the GCC side, in order to make sure that we take that responsibility seriously, and also on the parent organization that hey, if we need to build a good GCC, then we need to put a lot more investment in terms of time and energy into this.
Yeah, Shiraz, I can agree more with where Anirban and Ganesh are going. I'll just make two quick points, right? I think on the value migration versus the cost perception with GCCs, we have to be realistic that the budgets in companies sit with finance, while the requirements for the values sit outside of finance. So I think it's very important to explain to finance value as a justifiable expense, right? And I think I use it with my own CFO when I was at Regeneron. I think AC Nielsen said the price of light is cheaper than the cost of darkness, right? So you got to kind of communicate the value in terms they understand, which means you've also got to show what things you're doing that are redundant and replaceable and will add immense value going into a GCC. That's number one. And then on the stakeholder side, I sat in commercial, right? And it's very important even among commercial stakeholders to get back to the argument of the primacy of business strategy. Every conversation has to start with alignment business strategy. I think it's very important for GCCs themselves, as well as stakeholders within companies on the client side, to position GCCs as strategy plays. They are not add-ons to execute a strategy. They are strategy defining. And if you look at the talent, for example, number of people that I've dealt with, the folks on this panel, they're incredibly well trained in the blend of operational to strategic. And I think it's very important to bring that perspective out and dispel the myth that exists on the client side.
No, that's great. I think really insightful points here from all three of you. Probably just going deeper into the life cycle of a GCC, and I think that's the next thing. So Ganesh, starting with you, because of the experience that you bring, most people join a GCC at some stage of maturity. I think you have built it from scratch. You have seen it evolve through, as you mentioned, a GDC, and from 0 to 350 to begin with. So the question which I have for you is the sustainability aspect of it. How do you continue ensuring that a GCC maintains its relevance? How do you ensure that the initial build energy continues through the whole evolution? And how do you continue ensuring that you're relevant to the headquarters year after year? Because 25 years is a long journey, and you have to make sure that you're relevant.
Yeah, that's a great question, Shiraz. I think I would probably say as any capability center starts, it all happens in waves. I would say probably there's an initial period where you have the jubilation of forming something. You go through the form, norm, storm, perform cycle, and then you get to a point where you can say, hey, we are able to prove certain things in there. Now what happens is around the cusp of 3 to 5 year window, I call that the fatigue zone, or more end of the first honeymoon wave, I would call it, because then people tend to say, hey, I need to look for other challenges. I need to look for other areas, other stimulants. Again, as a country, because India came up from a big services model, in the initial days we saw that people were itching to kind of experience different things. There's going to be some amount of monotony going to set in, because if you're a product-based GCC, then you have to do a lot of things and then take it to fruition 100%, and that needs a lot of stamina and energy in there. Now, how do you break that monotony, and how do you break that fatigue, and then how do you keep the teams challenged? So that is where we started looking into see that how do we start changing that landscape within the same GCC context itself, so that you provide other opportunities, which basically takes away that monotony and then the fatigue away from the team. So that's one aspect of it. So every GCC will have to continuously think through that to say that maybe it's 3 years, maybe it is 5 years, somewhere there there is that plateau zone. So you have to find out how do you break the rhythm, so that people look for things and other areas other opportunities from that point in time. The second thing that you have to do is especially from a product-based company, you need to have deep-rooted legacy, longevity there. It's not anybody can come in and then do things differently. But you need to understand the domain. You need to understand the product. It takes time to build both of them together. So the best thing that in order to increase the value is to make sure that you avoid the hiring churn. So some of the things that we started putting together is to see how we can minimize the attrition levels, and then also help people to kind of continue to stay on. Both the one is in terms of increased challenges, opportunities, change of landscape, plus how they can also start contributing to other things in terms of ownership and being part of certain global team. So some of these opportunities and other things in some way or the other will help us to plug the I would say the attrition and hiring churn, which will means you would be able to increase your retention quotient, which intangibly will add more value, because the efficiency increases when people are more knowledgeable and they are able to do things better.
Perfect. Thanks, Ganesh. I think I asked the question from a different point of view, and I got both sides of it. I mean, you were looking at plateauing not only from the relevance of the headquarters, but also plateauing from the point of view of the people who are working in the GCCs and ensuring that they have that interesting career path that makes their work interesting day by day and year on year, right? That's important. So just moving on, and Anirban, you are in retail. I think that's a really uh, an industry which is so relevant in today's AI and data space, right? Uh, and you also sit at the intersection of two big things. One is this really accelerated speed of AI, data analytics, etc. But at the same time, a large retail enterprise, which obviously would have some challenges of moving fast. So I would assume that there is friction. The question is, where is the friction, and how do you, in your role, address it?
Uh, Thank you, Shiraz. I think a very relevant question. For the friction is real, okay, and I'll be honest. The overall technology landscape, and specifically AI, is evolving maybe on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis. Okay, while large enterprises evolve through processes, governance, risk management, change management, operational realities, you name it all. Okay, the challenge is really whether AI can do something. The challenge is whether the organization can absorb the change required to use it effectively. In retail, decisions affect customers, associates, supply chain, you name it, pricing, inventory, compliance, so many different business verticals within AI, within retail, right? So the question is always, can we deploy AI? Maybe yes. But the question that we need to ask is, can we deploy AI responsibly and at scale while maintaining our customer trust? If we are able to answer that question accurately, I think we are doing a great job. I've also learned that the hardest part of, and being in the field of data and AI, I've always been in this field of data and AI the last 2 decades, right? So my learning is that the hardest part of AI transformation isn't the model itself, okay? It's about the redesigning the workflows, the incentives, and the decision-making process around the model. Okay? Organization that eventually succeeds focus less on the AI experiments but more on the operational adoption coming through the new data and AI experience that we continuously evolve and build. Overall, I think if I had to conclude, I think AI does not create value when it's deployed, and this is coming from my own experience. AI actually creates value when the behavior changes, either within the enterprise or you are able to impact your customer in the most positive way.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. I think that whole cultural aspect of AI adoption across industries, across organizations is something which is overlooked. And, a lot of people just focus on the AI tools. They forget that there is the adoption challenge. They forget that there is a data foundation challenge. And, the focus is all about, okay, what's getting released next week and how does it impact us? But on this, I think the focus on industry, the questions that we have right now, Arvind, coming to you, you have operated in one of the most regulated industries, pharma, right, where the wrong decision or a misplaced decision is not only impacting revenue or margins, it's actually directly impacting the patients and the customers, your end consumers. So, what does building analytics in under this level of absolute scrutiny, regulation? What does this teach you, and what can GCCs, every GCC leader, borrow from this particular experience?
That's a great question, right? And what I'd love to say is in the life sciences, we had to deal with governance and some of the things we're talking about in the AI age about 30 years ago, right? So it's a really important piece. And I think accountability in analytics, having lived in analytics most of my life, is a very important thing, which means number one, in this day and age, when it affects patient outcome, when, one of the challenges in the life sciences, unlike in retail or other areas, is our business in the life sciences is pain. We're dealing with patients who are actually trying to express something they don't want most of the time, right? And that can be challenging because it's not very clear how you address it sometimes based on just what they say. But going back to your point, I think the first thing that GCCs probably need to focus on as much as we do on the client side is to start prioritizing decisions rather than, the pathways leading up to deliverables, right? So because everything is action driven, everything is accountable to a decision, right? So that's number one. Second is the clarity of assumptions. And I think GCCs would do a great favor to companies by doing two things very well, which they already do, but they kind of never come out to the fore. One is ask whether the business question being addressed is the right question. Because I can tell you the number of times we've gone down a pathway in a rabbit hole to find out that question was incorrect and will not help address the patient objective in any way, right? So that's the second one. And then being very clear about the assumptions that lead and the traceability of the data pathway going into the insight, right? I think that is a very important piece. And finally, the third one is the culture of experimentation, the adaptive experimentation that is necessary, because our data on the life sciences is a little different than many other industries in the sense that we are a derived demand model, right? Our patient is not the one who actually writes the product that they need. They have to go through intermediaries and channels, either payers or physicians. So it's really important to do test and control, and especially with AI-based analytics. I think, as Anirban said, it's very important to align that to the strategic outcomes that you get and then debate scale rather than go into, hey, I need to do this, and completely devoid of the outcome or accountability, and because that's never going to get any traction. So those are the three things I would say that really help in the life science, and I think these days in most other industries as well.
Thanks, Arvind. I think just picking up on the first two, is it the right question and are we making the right assumptions? So Ganesh, Anirban, do you see this question? Do you see these 2 points coming in your day-to-day work as well? Is it the right questions? Are we making the right assumptions from the headquarters perspective or from the GCC's perspective?
Please go ahead, Ganesh. I'll go last.
Yeah. So from our side, I think what Arvind said is bang on. A lot of times, typically, I would say probably there's also a cultural element to it. Sometimes when we get certain requirements, people assume that they must have been well formed, and the art of questioning is also not there. Again, that's something as a skill that people will have to develop to make sure that we get 100% understanding of what it is. I keep telling the teams and coach everybody to say that we think and act, we plan twice before we cut once. So in that aspect, it is important for us to understand everything before we start getting into even the first foot forward. Otherwise, as Arvind said, that we will end up in a rabbit hole, and then we have to dig ourselves out of it. So I think that aspect is still evolving. I would say there are some people who are inherently good at just front ending and then being critical and about asking the question, and then just trying to kind of work on it after they get a better understanding. And there are other group of people who basically have heads down, more interested in jumping into doing things. So I keep telling our teams that we need to evolve from being a doing organization into a defining organization, because the evolution happens only when you are able to put more focus around understanding the needs, understanding the requirements, and understanding the bigger picture and then the larger context. That's where you would be able to be doing things in a more accurate fashion, rather than just getting caught up in the weeds and then doing it. So that is really something that I have observed, and it's an evolution. I think people are learning. The more they see, the better results and outcomes coming out of the deeper understanding of those requirements, and then the thought process, and then the big picture. They are able to deliver better.
Thank you, Ganesh, and thank you, Arvind. A slightly different perspective, but on a lighter note, actually. I think when I was growing up in this industry and working closely with companies with different geographies, being part of the GCC, sometimes being part of the headquarters, I think there was a feedback or a feed forward that I used to get about me asking more questions, getting more business context, right? I think the ball has turned today, if I look at it. I don't think people need to improve their listening skills actually today. They're very good at asking questions. They're not very good at listening nowadays, right? So, like I said, Ganesh, Arvind, very valid points. But I also wanted to get in a different perspective. Like over asking and over asking your questions is also like get something done rather than just. World is not a binary outcome, right? It's not white zero. It's not black and white, right? Associates need to operate in the gray zone. We always operate in the gray zone, I think, both personally and professionally. So asking so many questions to make sure that it's binary or black and white will not cut the bill always, right? So it's a learning curve to actually operate within that gray zone. And that also helps you both, not just professionally, but also personally, to take on more difficult situations in life as you grow up the ladder and take a few risks along the way as well.
Thanks.
Sorry,
I think that's
very philosophical answer, but I thought.
Thank you for that reminder, Anirban. We need it.
Yes, absolutely.
Spot on, yeah. So, and Anirban, let's stick with you. You mentioned talent a couple of times. I think Ganesh alluded to it as well. Now, the skills that GCCs required a few years back is very different. We assume is very different from the skills that we require these days. Now, is that a statement that you would agree with? Is that a fair question? And what does, if there has been a change, what does that change look like? So if there are people watching this and saying, okay, this is somewhere maybe I would like to work towards, what should they be focusing on? What sort of skill set should they be building?
Fantastic question, Shiraz. I think 5 years ago, we hired primarily for your technical depth, your technical expertise, right? If someone was a strong engineer, a strong architect, data scientist or program manager, that was often enough. Today's technical skills are still, technical skills are still extremely necessary, but I don't think they are no longer sufficient. The talent we value most can connect technology to business outcomes. They understand customer behavior, your supply chain dynamics, and specifically I'm talking about the retail terminologies, right? They understand merchandising, they can connect with store operations, and more importantly, they can translate between these worlds of AI, data AI, and some other technology and the business side of it. In many ways, the most valuable people in GCCs today are not specialists or generalists. They are connectors. They can walk into a conversation with the business leaders, understand the problem, translate it into a technical solution, and then help drive adoption and change. I sometimes joke that 5 years ago, we hired people who could write great Python codes. Today, we are looking for people who can answer a much harder question. Should we be even writing this code in the first place? That's where business judgment becomes extremely critical. And the best thing is that AI is accelerating this entire shift. As AI increasingly automates the portions of coding, testing, documentation, and even solution design, the scarcity moves elsewhere. The bottleneck is no longer your technical execution. The bottleneck is defining the right problem, making trade-offs, influencing stakeholders, and driving the organizational change. So that's my point of view.
Okay. Thanks, Anirban. But Ganesh, do you see the same thing? Because you're in energy tech, right? It's a very different industry, and you've seen the life cycle of the GCC for the last 25 years. So obviously, the evolution has been quite different. So what is your perspective on the talent required, the talent pool required for GCCs?
So the landscape, I think, continues to keep changing. I think there are a few contributors to it. The number one is also the rapid technological advancements that's happening in terms of what's happening. And being in the energy tech, I think some of our products don't get caught up from a technology, but it also happens in really big spikes, and then you need to say that okay, we need this as of yesterday, and then we try to kind of accelerate on some of that adoption there. So which means then we have to go through this quick refresh of either upskilling or cross skilling and bringing new talent to the fore to build or bridge any capacity or talent gaps that we could be having. So that's one context that we continuously do that. And also sometimes we do partner, it's not that we GCCs are trying to do it all by ourselves. So we basically as a parent company, it's a joint activity in terms of partnering with a few service providers who bring that capability, and then bridge the gaps so that we can get bootstrap. That's one aspect of it. The second aspect is as GCCs, one of the things that we try to look for is we don't try to look for the I would say short-lived technical talent. We want to get people who are deep rooted and then can have that longevity. But if it is something which is only for a shorter need, we are better off just working with some third party partners and others who can bridge that gap, rather than we building it ourselves. So for us, the talent that we try to build is more around the industry domain. And as Anirban was saying, people need to have the deeper understanding of the overall business processes, how they can connect, everything together so that they can, get to the next levels. So those are all the type of the talent that we try to bring on. And then the rest basically, we try to kind of work with certain dynamic capacities through our third party partners.
Thanks, Ganesh. And I think, what both you and Anirban said, if the talent is changing and moving more towards the combination of tech and business, obviously the value is changing. And Arvind, that brings us to the next theme. I think two themes which have already been addressed in the answers earlier, but the whole cost versus value arbitrage, how have we moved from cost arbitrage to value arbitrage through GCCs? And I think something that Ganesh mentioned also, the doing versus defining. And both of these, I think, are pretty well connected. So, Arvind, this is a pattern that is showing up in the evolution of GCCs over the last few years, that organizations have got very good at executing what is asked, but at the same time, they would like to make that jump into actually defining what they need to do. Owning the agenda rather than just delivering against an agenda which is given to them. So, as someone who's seen this across multiple organizations, how can we break that pattern? How can GCCs move from cost to value? How can they move from doing to defining?
Yeah, Shiraz, I think this is a question that keeps coming up, and I think GCCs need to own it, but also folks within companies who work with GCCs need to own it. And let me just clarify what I mean by that, right? One is, if you want to define a direction, you have to be accountable for what you're going to give up to make something possible. You cannot just be doing things. So doing has a component that also speaks to redundancy. Going back to the comment I made earlier, in a C-suite, particularly in the CFO office, if you want to do something, you're accountable for also saying what you shouldn't do, right? So one of the ways, going back to what Anirban was saying, and I want to thank him again for being realistic in terms of what we need to do on an everyday basis. But you've got to look at tasks based on, the frequency with which they're being done and the value they bring. And for example, when I was at Regeneron, that's something we did with our, partners and our, the new GCC that we're setting up. You have to look at how are you prioritizing your efforts based on that matrix, right? And if you're spending a lot of effort, and many companies do without knowing it, on highly complicated things that have very little value, that has to stop. I mean, for example, reporting sometimes falls into this. There's a whole bunch of reporting that happens that the organization can live without, frankly, because number one, many people don't read it. Second is it's a rear view look when the business needs knowledge on the go. And so this does not help foster the perception you want to move of a GCC towards defining an outcome. because it just plays into, this delivery of output, right? So I think the one point I do want to make here, right, and I'm going to keep it brief because I do want to hear Ganesh and Anirban's response since they live this.
Yeah.
Is you've got to earn the opportunity to define direction, which means you've got to really play into the defining of the strategy. And I know we're going to touch on it later in terms of what needs to change on an everyday basis, but you cannot define without changing your role. You cannot just live in a world of perception. You have to live in the world of proof, and you have to live in the world of experience, right? So GCCs are a brand, and that brand cannot live just with a perception, because that's a mindset, right? It has to speak to experience and relevance, like we talked about earlier, which is why should I care about you today? And on the client side, people are highly myopic in terms of what the word strategy, right? Strategy can be very long term, but most people spend 90% of their time on what I would call immediate short term, near term strategies. And GCCs have a great role there, right? And just coming back very quickly to the talent conversation here, because I think it's related, is talent, you need talent, like Anirban and Ganesh said, that straddles a greater surface area these days. But that's not a need, because organizations are talking about future of work. And that's an opportunity to belong. It's not a need, because even on the client side, you don't have that. Right? And GCCs are very well qualified to offer up that talent to define agendas, right? So that's the last point I will make, that I think it's a great opportunity for GCCs that they should take up.
Thanks, Arvind. So, Anirban, Ganesh, before you add to this, probably you could also take into context that yes, this is what GCC should be doing, but what is preventing them from actually achieving this? What is actually pulling them back? So if you could answer that same question, but also at this point, that what is the biggest obstacle that they face in actually being able to deliver value rather than cost arbitrage? Ganesh, Anirban?
Yeah. Hey, for me, I think one thing I would say, Arvind was pretty accurate in terms of saying that, the areas that needs focus on. Now, for me, I would look at it in terms of if we need to own a larger outcome from a GCC perspective, then it's also not about just establishing that the demonstrating that the capability, but it is also about owning it end to end. I feel that's one area where I see gaps. There are people who have the capability, but sometimes people blink. And because this is something, the moment you stick your neck out, you need to make sure that you are taking that 100% ownership, accountability and responsibility, and then steer everything towards to make it happen. Now, it is not that we don't have people. It's about how we can coach people to get there, making sure that all the GCCs, the more people who can do end-to-end, take end-to-end ownership, accountability and responsibility, then that adds a lot more value to the GCC, because the businesses end up seeing that these people are able to manage better things. That's one thing. The second thing is also they need to get away from the thought process as to we are there is a parent, and then we need to be a feeder to the parent. That mindset should go away. We need to start thinking ourselves on the equal footing from a business context and industry context, so that we can, rather than some of these thought process manifesting from the parent or HQ down to the GCCs. It should start reverberating from the GCCs itself to say that hey, we can do this, and then they front end some of these things, and having that ownership mindset along with this ability to demonstrate that they have a better understanding of the larger picture, and then the industry context or domain context, and then able to deliver that outcome. I think that will add tremendous value, and then we'll be able to rethink in terms of how the GCCs will be performing in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the point that Arvind made was primarily, if you look at the entire GCC landscape, the ultimate sign of ownership from a GCC standpoint is when business leaders stop asking, "Can you build this?" and start asking, "What do you think we should do?" A question on the similar lines, right? That's usually the moment the GCC team kind of realizes that it's no longer about delivering work, it's helping steer the business. So, however, again, from a practical standpoint, I think there are multiple factors that actually prevents organization from making the transition. Is the transition not possible? Definitely no. The transition is possible, but sometimes it could be a function of the way the GCC has been set up. It could be a function of time and all of that. Uh, I think, in my point of view and from my experience, I often think of the journey as three different stages: the execution, trust, can they deliver, and this is from a leadership standpoint. So the leadership has to create room for ownership as well. So I'll give two angles. One is from the leadership standpoint, where they have to create room from ownership. Ownership cannot simply be demanded, it has to be entrusted. That often means giving teams responsibility for outcomes, metrics, decisions, and not just deliverables. And that's where these are the three stages that I envision and think about. Executions trust, like from a leadership mindset, can they deliver what we asked for? Expertise trust, do they understand this domain deeply? And then there's a judgment trust, where do we trust their recommendation and decisions? That I think is very, very important from a leadership mindset. I think one of the other things which is on top of my head, which I feel teams need to move from presenting solutions to presenting recommendations. Instead of saying, "Here's what we have built," the teams, as part of GCC, and that comes with the GCC leadership experience as well, they need to start saying, "Here's the problem we observed and the options we consider and the approach we recommend." Okay, so it's not like here's one problem that we have observed and here's one point solution that we have come in. We need to show the maturity that we have explored multiple options, and that's why a lot of the newer GCCs you'll see are hiring experienced GCC leaders right at the beginning to set up their teams, who bring along this experience through their journey working along with GCCs. So
Thanks, Anirban. I think that's really insightful, and probably the next question builds upon what you said. You mentioned three aspects, right? Execution trust, expertise trust, and judgment trust. Now, obviously, trust is achieved when you can actually deliver something but when you are delivering, how do you measure the value of what you deliver? And when it's execution, it's clear. It's always easy to measure the productivity and the value. But when you go into insight generation, into things like decision support, recommendations, how do you? The old measures are breaking down. So how do you actually get a good measurement around it? How do you show that you're actually delivering something that you've promised? So let's start with you, Anirban, since you mentioned that.
Very interesting question, and a question that I think is top of everybody's mind right now, which is measuring productivity in the age of AI. This is probably across boardrooms. I think this question has been repeatedly asked across the entire leadership group. And historically, if you look at it, productivity was relatively easy to measure. We counted reports generated, tickets closed, lines of codes written, or projects delivered. AI actually complicates all of that. If an engineer completes a task in 30 minutes instead of 3 days because of AI assistance, have they become less productive because they have produced fewer hours of work? Obviously not. So the focus needs to move away from activity metrics towards outcome metrics, I think. We should all be measuring decision quality, decision speed, automation impact, business value that all of it is creating. Maybe also CSAT scores to see the improvement in the customer experience, and finally the risk reduction. One of the things that I've actually noticed, or rather one of the traps that sometimes organizations fall into, is trying to measure AI using the pre-AI metrics, like how we used to compute productivity in the maybe 5 years from now or a decade back, right? It's a little like evaluating your automobile based on how well it feeds hot stress, right? So the measurement framework itself needs to be evolved. No silver bullet to answer this question, unfortunately, because it's very, very enterprise specific. A lot of organizations, a lot of consulting organizations have tried to help us with frameworks, but the framework for your organization for measuring productivity has to be very, very unique to yourself, because that's where you know what the processes you have created, and the metrics of measurement or metrics to measure improvement in productivity have to be unique to the processes that lie within your organization. So sorry, I don't have a right answer for this, but this is just the thought that I have on top of my mind.
That's fair. Ganesh, would you like to continue before we hand it over to Arvind as a consumer perspective?
Sure. Yeah. So from a productivity perspective, there are a few things. Again, I agree with Anirban. This is one common topic, that keeps, coming up at the senior levels everywhere. There's also other thing that I also seen is because we have distributed teams across multiple geographies, the comparison as to which team is more productive than the other team, which is basically more of a HQ decision to say that where we have to kind of put more investments in, how it has to happen, because we have development centers in multiple geographies across the globe. So now one thing that always comes to us is a lot of times when you're building something, it goes back to one of the earlier topic that we talked about, in terms of having a better understanding and making sure that you deliver accurately to those from a product and solution perspective. For me, one of the most important aspect, again, I'm talking in terms of the KPI measurement, tangible aspects, is how do you make sure that you are not doing any rework? Because a lot of times the efficiency or productivity goes when there is a gap in understanding and people end up doing rework, and then you instead of doing something within a stipulated time frame or within certain effort, you end up doing taking a lot more time. So you have budget overruns, cost overruns, time overruns, and then also quality issues. So especially when you deliver the product, is it behaving the way it should be behaving? So some of the thing is again, if we can ensure that that as a team we have a bigger understanding of what we have to deliver, and then getting the right people to do the right things. Again, that is very, very important, because then you will be able to avoid a lot of this rework and then the issues in terms of quality or time overruns. So then that will make sure that the GCCs are able to deliver more productive work. So that's probably the initial part of it. Now the more difficult part is where Anirban has talked about, where people are able to offer solutions and judgments. That's the more harder part of to say that hey, I offered a recommendation, and did the recommendation really yield to a tangible one, which means then the team had been able to recommend something, and then that got implemented, and then that was good. So this is also another form of how productive the teams are in trying to kind of bring in the right recommendations to the table, so that the business can action on it. That's also important. But again, there is no one size fits all. It all depends upon the maturity level of certain teams, and then how you can enable them to grow up that maturity ladder. That is really, really very, very important. And also from a business perspective, in my opinion, this is not purely a GCC only role. It's also an equal partnership from the HQ perspective, also to enable the GCC in terms of making sure that they are able to participate, and they are able to support in terms of that journey, in terms of being more productive and delivering more outcomes.
Thanks, Ganesh. So Arvind, from the HQ perspective, I think that makes it more relevant to you. What are the measures that you would put as a consumer of GCCs to make them more relevant?
Yeah, so I'm going to also focus more on the AI side, because that's becoming, as both Ganesh and Anirban have alluded to. I think what I have tried to do personally is, I think people try to go into revenue immediately when it comes to, there's a lot of conversation obviously there around scaling versus pilots and so on. But revenue tends to be a lagging indicator with some of these newer capabilities, particularly AI, right? So I think it's important on this topic to keep the C-suite focused on immediate gains, right? So I think there are a few that I can speak to. One is, I think Anirban alluded to adoption. I think that's key. How many people are actually using it, right? That's right away a very important thing to track. The second thing would be something like, is your model performance stable, right? Are you producing consistently accurate measures of prediction in what you're doing? And it's very important, I think, to kind of be on top of that as something is being executed rather than after it's over, just so people feel comfortable that, if the GCC is doing something innovative, that innovation's actually adding immediate value, right? The third is, I think one important, probably in life sciences more than the others, is governance health, right? So has anything in terms of use cases required an escalation? And if it did, how quickly did it resolve? This is becoming a very important issue with use case registries, right? And it will become a very important issue with agents as we go forward, right? This could stifle agents in companies because governance can take over if you really don't kind of see how things are happening as they are running, right? And the last one is operational impact, right? So if you put in something in place to make something better, always compare it in a measurable way to what was being done before, whether it's report execution, whether it's a data quality agent, whether it's a forecasting supply chain agent, right? I think if you do those four, they are very important to show first before you go into, did it bring in more revenue, right? Or did it save costs? Because this keeps the lights on in a business. And so that's what I would say, Shiraz, in terms of, metrics that I look at or tend to suggest we should look at on the business side.
Thanks, Arvind. I think
Shiraz, can I add just one more point to this, because it's a very interesting topic. One thing that I definitely think is not a measure of productivity is the number of token usage. I'm actually extremely skeptical that tokens are the right measure of productivity here. Tokens are easy to count because I've been hearing people like number of tokens usage is equal to the productivity. Tokens are always easy to count. It's just like the lines of codes written, hours worked, tickets closed were easy to count in the previous eras. But activity and impact are not the same thing. So if one of my associates uses AI to generate 10,000, 100,000 lines of code using certain number of tokens, and another associate asks a question that eliminates the need for the work altogether, who was more productive? I would say it's the second person. The risk that we have is that we become very efficient at producing more content, more code, more analysis without creating proportionally more value. So that's another viewpoint of how we shouldn't be measuring, because we have all been speaking of how we should be measuring productivity.
Anirban, that is really contextual. I mean, given the whole AI conversations that are going on and the focus on token usage, etc., that makes it really relevant. I think Arvind, the point that you mentioned, the most important point which I took away is that treat revenue as a lagging indicator. There are many more things that are to be measured to make it more to make the relevance of GCCs more beneficial for the organization. We are out of time, but I'll just probably request you for 5 minutes more for two things. One is a forward-looking perspective, not necessarily optimistic, more realistic, but to each of you, a short, probably forward-looking statement from each of you on what do you think GCCs will be 3 to 5 years later? What would they look like? How different would they be from now? And how wide is the gap where GCCs are now to achieve that? So if we could make it quick, a minute each to each of you. Arvind, let's begin with you. 5 years down the line, how do you see GCCs?
I would like GCCs to be much more purposeful. By that I mean a deliberate focus. I would like to see GCC heads like Anirban and Ganesh sit on corporate C-suite leadership teams to drive direction. And I'd like budgets to be based on value rather than cost after activities.
Perfect. Anirban?
So, thank you. I'm lucky that Albertsons is a new GCC, and that's why even while sitting out of the GCC, I'm able to manage the entire data and AI portfolio globally across India, US, and Manila. Having said that, I think if I look at 5 years down the line, I think the most advanced GCCs will look kind of different, and they will be operating as globally integrated capability hubs rather than geographically distributed delivery centers. And there will be some gap between leaders and laggards that won't be measured in technology. It will be measured in how much effectively the GCCs adapt to the headquarters culture. The culture what is extremely very important. So integrating as part of the overall culture of the organization, being a new GCC is extremely important.
Ganesh?
Hey, so I would probably focus more around like a deep tech or a product specific GCC type of a model there, like, where I would say where the GCCs today are like, have a lesser level of ownership around like, the full product life cycle. Like, when I say cradle to grave, it's like all the way from, defining the product, like, and, which is from the business context to delivering the product to accomplish the business context, So I would expect like, 5 years from now, a larger level of, ownership around that full product life cycle, all the way from, the business front ending to like, managing the ultimate outcome and making sure that like, they add like greater value to the overall like, process. So that is basically where I would see the GCCs are industry.
Thanks, Ganesh. I think it's interesting that all of you had very different perspectives on what the future is, though it all comes together to what the future model is going to be. Closing thoughts, so I think one from each of you, which would be something that you've sort of learned from the other two panelists. So Anirban, let's start with you. So what do you think is the most insightful thing that you've learned from Ganesh and Arvind?
I think one of the, like in so many different words, the value creation absolutely is extremely important. That's something that I've believed in and reiterated by both Ganesh and Arvind. I think the relationship with the HQ, which is kind of a balance between partnership and pressure. I think as GCCs and the GCC operating model continues to evolve, I kind of implicitly understand that the best relationships contains a healthy amount of both partnership and pressure between the two ecosystems, which is HQ and GCC. So,
what about you, Ganesh?
Yeah, for me, I think from what Arvind said, that like it is important that the revenue is a lagging indicator, like that resonates very well. That's something that we continue to like we should emphasize, like again, it's a lot of upstream, I would say evangelization that has to happen, like some of these stakeholders are at a broader level. So that's very, very important. Second one, like from what Anirban had said, like how not to measure productivity, that's also important, because while we look at like how do we measure productivity, we need to be also like with the evolution of things like rapidly hitting us, we need to also like continue to look at like the ways not to measure productivity, and then like be very realistic in terms of what it is, and making sure that like we are accurate on that. Those two are very, very important.
Arvind?
Shiraz, so I'll throw you into this pool as well, right? Because it's been very enlightening to see how an outside-in perspective can really help you define your strategy, but also, as both Ganesh and Anirban have alluded several times, it's important to operate kind of every day, right? So how do you bring the right operational things while defining the strategy? How do you bring objectivity within the enterprise from a unit that has been perceived as somehow not in the enterprise, but really can do more for you within the enterprise, right? That to me has been very illuminating. And illumination is a word I like, which I think both Anirban and Ganesh have done. And I know that outside in helps analytics illuminate as opposed to just support decisions, right? And I think that is what is eye-opening to me, why GCCs really need a greater role in the decision play.
No, great. Thanks for those insights. Just to wrap it up, I think it was really interesting to hear these different contexts. I'm really hopeful for the overall GCC environment, given that leaders like yourselves are there in the right place, believing in the right direction for GCCs also. The fact that, yes, we need to move from cost to value, from doing to defining, and what are the steps that we need to do that, take care of that. I think a couple of things, obviously, activity versus impact. Anirban, you mentioned that. Ganesh, you alluded to the talent pool and how do we ensure that we don't get into the fatigue zone. And Arvind, obviously from your experience, you mentioned a lot of things, but I really liked the thing that you mentioned. The price of light is cheaper than the cost of darkness, and I think that's something which stuck with me and which I'm going to hold on to. But really appreciate your insights. We did have a rapid fire round and a few question and answers, but I think we are out of time. I think that's a great sign that the discussion was really good. It was very interactive, and appreciate your participation at this event. Thanks.
Thanks, Shiraz.
Thanks, Shiraz. Thanks, Anirban. Thanks,
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.